It shouldn't have been flying. Physics said no. Aerodynamics said impossible. But there it was, 4,000 feet above the harsh North African desert. A B-17 bomber, torn practically in half. The tail section was swaying in the wind like a broken pendulum, held together by a few jagged strips of aluminum and the sheer will of the pilot gripping the yoke. One sudden move, the tail snaps. One gust of wind, they spiral into the ground. Inside that broken fuselage, 10 men were holding their breath, waiting to die. But the pilot, Ken Bragg, had made a silent promise to his crew. He wasn't just flying a plane anymore. He was wrestling a corpse all the way home. It was February 1st, 1943, Tunisia, the chaotic skies over North Africa. The 97th Bomb Group was hammering German supply lines at the Tunis docks. It was a standard mission. Drop the payload. Turn back to base in Biskra, Algeria. But on that day, the All-American, a B-17F Flying Fortress, was about to become a legend of impossible survival. Lieutenant Ken Bragg felt the vibration in his teeth before he heard it. Flying a B-17 wasn't like driving a car. It was physical labor. You muscled the fortress through the sky. But today, the air felt heavier. According to the navigator's log, they were already taking flak. Black puffs of smoke appearing instantly off the starboard wing. Bragg adjusted his grip. His gloves were damp with sweat despite the freezing altitude. He scanned the horizon. It looked clear. Too clear. He wrote in his mind, "Just keep the formation tight. Just get us to the drop zone. The smell inside a bomber is specific. It's a mix of high-octane fuel, cold steel, and unwashed fear." The roar of the 4 Wright Cyclone engines was deafening. A constant, thundering bass note that rattled your bones. Sunlight glared off the plexiglass nose cone. It was blindingly bright, contrasting with the dark bursts of anti-aircraft fire below. The plane jumped. Once, twice. Flak shrapnel pinged against the fuselage like hail on a tin roof. The intercom crackled. Static. Then a voice. Sharp. Urgent. "Bandits! 2 o'clock high!" Bragg's eyes snapped right. "I see 'em. Brace." The formation tightened up. 2 German Messerschmitt Bf-109s began their attack run. They were hunting. The first fighter strafed the lead plane and peeled off. Textbook maneuver, but the second German pilot made a mistake. Or maybe he was dead at the stick. We will never know. He came in too fast. He lost control. He didn't pull up. He rolled. In a split second, the gray belly of the German fighter filled the entire view of the rear gunners. Crunch. The sound wasn't an explosion. It was the sickening screech of metal shearing through metal. The German fighter slammed directly into the rear fuselage of the All-American. The impact was violent. The B-17 shuddered as if it had hit a brick wall in the sky. Navigator Harry Nuessel later recounted that moment of impact. He didn't understand what he was seeing at first. He wrote, "I looked back and saw a huge hole. It looked like the tail was gone. I thought, this is it. We're dead." The German plane had disintegrated, spiraling down into the desert. But the All-American was mortally wounded. The collision had sliced through the fuselage just behind the waist gunners. The left horizontal stabilizer was gone completely. The vertical fin was shredded. But the worst part? The fuselage itself. The top was cut open. The sides were slashed. The entire tail section of the massive bomber was held on by a few flimsy diagonal spars on the floor and a strip of metal on the side. It was hanging. Literally hanging. The tail swayed back and forth, independent of the rest of the plane. It looked like a fishtail flapping in the breeze. If Bragg slowed down, the drag would snap the tail off. If he turned too hard, the centrifugal force would rip it away. And in the very back, Sam Sarpolis, the tail gunner. He was still in there, alive, floating in a detached metal cage miles above the ground. The co-pilot looked at the damage, then back at Bragg. "Ken, the tail? It's loose." Bragg didn't look back. He stared at the horizon. "Does it still fly?" "Barely." "Then we fly." Bragg realized the terrifying math of their situation. The other planes in the formation were slowing down to stay with them. The squadron leader radioed, "Get out! Bail out! You can't hold that!" But Bragg knew something they didn't. They had no parachutes. Well, they had them. But the impact had jammed the escape hatches or damaged the rigging. And more importantly, the turbulence of opening the hatch might create enough drag to finish off the tail. Also, Sam Sarpolis was trapped in the back. He couldn't crawl forward across the gaping hole. If they bailed, Sam died alone. Bragg made the decision. No parachutes, no bailing out. He had to fly this broken collection of spare parts 300 miles back to base. He had to keep the speed high to keep the tail streamed straight by the airflow. Speed was life. Slowing down was death. The next 90 minutes were an eternity. Bragg fought the yoke with every ounce of strength in his arms. The controls were sluggish, heavy, unresponsive. The wind screamed through the massive gash in the fuselage, freezing the crew to the bone. The All-American drifted away from the protection of the formation. They were alone, a limping gazelle in a sky full of lions. 2 more German fighters appeared. They circled the wounded bomber. The German pilots flew close. They saw the damage. They saw the daylight shining through the fuselage. They saw the tail swinging in the wind. It is said they didn't fire. Maybe they were out of ammo. Maybe they feared the debris would hit them if the B-17 finally snapped. Or maybe, just maybe, they were too stunned by the physics of it to pull the trigger. Bragg flew on, over the Atlas Mountains. The updrafts were brutal. Every bump in the air sent a shock wave through the spine of the plane. Creak, groan, snap. The metal spars held, but they were stretching. 1 degree of pitch too high, the tail falls off. 1 degree too low, they dive. Bragg's arms were burning, his vision blurred from the strain. Ahead, a faint strip of brown dirt appeared in the haze. Biskra Airfield. Home, the landing. This was the moment of truth. To land, you have to slow down. To land, you have to lower the tail wheel. To land, you have to impact the ground. All 3 things should, by all rights, snap the plane in half. Bragg radioed the tower for an emergency clearing. He came in hot. Much faster than a standard landing, he couldn't risk the stall speed. He gently, agonizingly gently, eased the throttle back. The ground rushed up. He didn't flare the nose up like usual. He flew it onto the ground flat. Screech! The main wheels kissed the dirt. Dust plumed up. Now, the tail wheel. If it slams down, the fuselage breaks, the plane flips, and they all burn. Bragg held the nose up as long as he could. Waiting, praying, gravity took over. The tail wheel settled onto the runway. Thump. Silence. No snap. No fire. The plane rolled to a stop. The crew scrambled out of the hatches. Sam Sarpolis, the tail gunner, crawled out of his metal prison, shaking but alive. They stood on the hot sand of Algeria and looked back at their ship. From the ground, it looked even worse. The tail was hanging by a literal thread. You could see through the plane. Moments after the last man stepped off, the tail section gave a final groan and sagged. It had held on just long enough. The ambulance crew arrived. They didn't need stretchers. They just needed a camera. That photo, the one with the impossible gash, was taken right there. Proof that miracles have a shape. And that shape is a B-17. According to the official 97th Bomb Group records, the All-American never flew again. It was stripped for parts. But the crew? All 10 men returned to duty. Boeing engineers later studied the damage. They calculated the structural integrity. Their conclusion was simple. The plane was aerodynamically unstable and structurally severed. Mathematically, it should have crashed the moment of impact. Stories like the All-American remind us that machines are only as strong as the men who fly them. If you want more forgotten stories of the real people who lived through World War II, hit that subscribe button. This channel exists to bring their voices back. They say the B-17 was built to take a beating. But on that day in 1943, it wasn't the aluminum that brought them home. It was the refusal to let go.